What are you doing here?
Ain't I welcomed in my own house again?
No. I never expected you would ever be back.
You want me dead in the war?
Most people think betrayal happens fast. One moment, one choice, one knife in the back. They're wrong. The worst kind of betrayal is slow, patient. It grows in the dark while you're not looking, fed by someone who smiles at you every single day. And by the time you finally see it, your whole life is already ash. This is the story of Callum Briggs, a man who left home a soldier, faithful husband, and devoted father. A man who sent every dollar he earned in a war zone back to the woman he loved. A man who survived enemy fire, desert heat, and 2 years of separation, only come home and discover that the real war had never been overseas. It had been in his own house. But here's the part they never saw coming. Callum didn't break. He planned. Fort Worth, Texas, 3 years before the story ends. Callum Briggs was the kind of man people trusted before he even opened his mouth. Something in the eyes, calm, steady, like he'd already thought through every angle and decided not to panic about any of it. He was 34 years old, broad-shouldered, with hands roughened from 12 years of military service, and the kind of quiet confidence that men spend their whole lives trying to fake. He had a daughter named Avery, 8 years old, with her mother's eyes and a stubborn chin. A son named Theo, 6, who slept with a toy soldier under his pillow and told everyone at school his dad was a hero. A house in a quiet neighborhood north of Fort Worth. Not lavish, but paid down nearly 40%. The kind of home that meant something because every mortgage payment had been a choice. A decision to stay, to build, to commit. And he had a wife. Nadine Briggs, née Holloway, was the kind of woman who made an entrance into every room she entered. Not because she was loud, but because she was magnetic. Dark hair, sharp humor, the smile that had stopped Callum cold at a college party in 2014 and never really released him. She worked as a regional marketing director for a hospitality group based in Dallas. Good money, stylish travel, the kind of career that gave her lunch meetings at hotel rooftops and a wardrobe that cost more than most people's rent. On the surface, they were solid. Date nights every other Friday. Weekend soccer for Theo. Sunday morning pancakes. A marriage that looked, from any reasonable angle, like the real thing. Callum trusted her completely. That's the part you need to understand before anything else. He trusted her completely. The orders came on a Tuesday in March. Callum sat at the kitchen table and read the paperwork twice. 14-month deployment. Extended to 24 given theater requirements. Special operations advisory role. Departure in 6 weeks. He didn't want to go. He'd been weighing a transition out of active duty for almost a year. Had even begun quiet conversations with a logistics firm in Dallas about a civilian operations role. The money wasn't military money, but it was steady, and more importantly, it was here. He'd be home for dinner. He told Nadine that same evening, "I'm thinking about pushing back, requesting reassignment to a stateside role. We have 2 kids. The house is almost where we need it. And I've been talking to a firm in Dallas that..." "Callum." She set down her wine glass. Her tone was careful, measured. "We need the deployment income. You know that. The medical bills from Theo's surgery last year, the car note, the roof repair, we're stretched. If you go, we can clear all of it. Come back clean." He hesitated. He was good at reading people. It was literally part of his job. But he read Nadine as a woman worried about money, not a woman trying to get rid of him. He couldn't know then what he would learn later. That the medical bills she cited had already been paid by her parents. That the roof repair had cost a third of what she claimed. That the real reason she wanted him overseas was standing in her office every morning, 6'2", in a tailored suit, smelling like cedar and ambition. His name was Preston Vale, Nadine's boss. But Callum didn't know any of that yet. He knew only what she showed him. A wife who seemed to be fighting for their financial future, making the hard calculation that love sometimes required. 3 days of silence. 1 long fight about priorities. 2 nights of her crying about how hard it was to manage everything alone. He signed the deployment papers. He kissed his children goodnight. And on a gray April morning, with Avery wrapped around his leg and Theo standing stiff and brave, and trying not to cry, Callum Briggs left for the desert. If you've ever sacrificed for someone who didn't deserve it, you already know where this is going. Stay with it, because the ending is something else entirely. Subscribe if you're new. The next 24 months were the hardest of Callum's life. Forward operating bases in territories that didn't appear on news maps. Temperatures that broke 45 degrees before noon. For teammates from his unit killed in an ambush outside a village whose name he would never say out loud again. A shrapnel wound to his left forearm that required field surgery and earned him a commendation he didn't want, and 3 weeks of recovery he used to call home and check on his kids. Every paycheck, base salary, hazard pay, combat bonuses, re-enlistment incentives went directly to Nadine. He'd set it up that way before he left. Full direct deposit access. Everything. Use it to clear the mortgage balance, he told her in one of their early calls. Whatever's left after bills, put it in the joint savings. When I come home, we should be close to free and clear on the house. I will, she said. I love you. He believed her. He had no reason not to. The calls became shorter as the months passed. He told himself it was a time difference, the poor connection, the stress of managing 2 kids alone. She always had a reason. Avery had a fever. Theo's school play ran late. She was exhausted. The calls dropped to once a week, then every 10 days. He noticed but didn't push. He was trying not to make her life harder. What he didn't know was that by month 8 of his deployment, Preston Vale was sleeping in his bed. By month 12, Nadine had quietly moved Preston's coffee machine into the kitchen. By month 18, she had introduced him to the children as Mommy's friend from work. And Avery, 8 years old with her father's eyes, had stopped asking when Daddy was coming home. Callum sensed none of it. He sent love letters. He drew pictures with Theo over video call. He called Avery's teacher to check on her reading progress. He told his unit sergeant, a broad-chested man from Beaumont named Guthrie, that he had the best wife in Fort Worth. Guthrie had just nodded. He'd seen this movie before. Month 24, a Wednesday in April. Callum Briggs landed at DFW Airport with a single duffel bag, a Purple Heart he kept in a Ziploc, and $212 in his wallet. He had sent everything else home. Everything. He took a taxi because he wanted to surprise her. He'd told Nadine he was coming. She knew the date, the approximate time, but he hadn't told her the exact hour. He imagined the kids running down the driveway, Avery leaping, Theo trying to be cool about it and failing, Nadine in the doorway, arms open. The taxi pulled onto their street at 3:17 in the afternoon. What he saw instead, the lawn was overgrown. 3 months of neglect, at least. The flower bed Nadine had planted the spring he left, the one she'd sent him photos of, proud as anything, was dead and brown. One of the shutters on the upstairs window was hanging at an angle. The mailbox was overflowing. He paid the driver and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Something was wrong. He'd been trained for 10 years to trust that feeling. He walked up the driveway. The door opened before he knocked. Nadine was standing in the frame, and for 1/2 second before her expression changed, he saw what was actually on her face when she didn't think he was watching. Not relief, not joy, not the face of a woman seeing the man she loved come home from war. Panic, quickly masked, a smile installed over it like a window display. She stepped forward and hugged him, and he hugged her back, and he felt the stiffness in her arms, the calculation in it, and he thought, something is wrong. You're here, she said. I'm here, he said. He walked inside. The house was clean, at least. She'd had warning enough to prepare for that. But things were off. A coffee mug on the counter, too large to be Nadine's. A jacket on the hook by the garage door. Adult male, size large, charcoal gray. The faint smell of a cologne he didn't recognize. He said nothing. He went upstairs and found his children. Avery hugged him tight enough to hurt, and he held her there in the hallway outside her room and let her cry into his shoulder without saying a word. Theo stood in his doorway in his soccer uniform, helmet under his arm, and then, so fast Callum almost missed it, his face crumpled like paper, and the boy crossed the room and wrapped both arms around his father's waist and just held on. Something had hurt these children. He didn't know everything yet, but he knew that. Downstairs, while Nadine made coffee she clearly didn't want to make, Callum sat at the kitchen table and asked the question he'd been waiting to ask for 2 years. How's the mortgage? Nadine's back was to him. She was quiet for 3 full seconds. The money is gone, Callum. He let that sit. Gone. Things were hard. I had expenses. The kids, the house, it adds up. I sent over $200,000 home, Nadine. His voice was completely level. 2 years of combat pay. Hazard pay, everything. Where did it go? She turned around, and in her eyes, not guilt, not sorrow, something harder. Something that had clearly been there a long time and had stopped pretending to be anything else. I had needs, she said. I was lonely. I was here alone with 2 kids while you were playing soldier. I was in a war zone, and I needed support. I needed someone. The room went cold. Callum Briggs had survived a desert ambush. He had carried a wounded teammate 300 meters under fire. He had sat with dying men and held their hands and not flinched. But in that kitchen, in the house he'd spent 12 years of military service paying for, he felt something he hadn't felt since he was 19 years old and lost his father. Completely alone. Someone, he repeated. His name is Preston. She said it almost defiantly, like she'd been rehearsing it, like she decided this was the moment. He's been good to me, good to the kids. And I think you should probably find somewhere else to stay while we figure out next steps. Callum looked at her for a long time. He was thinking, not about anger, not yet. He was thinking about what his sergeant used to say after an ambush. First, you assess damage, then you plan, never in the other order. When you say the money is gone, he said quietly, what exactly does that mean? It means it's gone. Her jaw was tight now. I had bills. I made decisions. We can talk to a lawyer about. The mortgage. What? The mortgage, Nadine. Is it paid or not? A pause that lasted just 1 second too long. There's equity, she said. It's complicated. He nodded slowly. He stood up from the table. He picked up his duffel bag. I'm going to go see an old friend, he said. I'll be back for the kids tomorrow. He walked to the door. He stopped. He turned back. Who else knew? He asked. She blinked. What? About Preston, about whatever this is. Who else knew while I was overseas? She didn't answer. He had his answer. He walked out. He sat in his truck, the old F-150 he kept in storage at his buddy Guthrie's place before deployment. And he sat there in the fading Texas afternoon with the engine running completely still for 11 minutes. Then he pulled out his phone, not to call a family member, not to call a lawyer, not even to call Guthrie. He opened his banking app. He entered the credentials for the joint account. And for the first time since he'd left for deployment, he read 2 years of transaction history. It took him 40 minutes to get through it all. By the end, his hands had stopped shaking. Not because the anger had faded, because it had settled into something else entirely. Something colder. Something patient. Callum Briggs has spent 12 years learning how to plan an operation in hostile territory with incomplete information, limited resources, and adversaries who were confident they had already won. He knew exactly how this worked. He knew exactly what came next. He started making calls. There's a moment in every operation where the enemy makes their fatal mistake. It's not when they attack. It's not when they lie. It's not even when they celebrate. It's when they stop watching. When they become so confident in their victory that they forget to check whether the man they buried is still breathing. Nadine Holloway Briggs made that mistake on a Thursday evening in April, when she uncorked a bottle of Malbec in the kitchen of her Fort Worth home and called Prestonville to tell him the coast was clear. She had no idea that by that same Thursday evening, Callum had already hired a forensic accountant. She had no idea that by Friday morning, he'd made contact with a military attorney. She had no idea that by Saturday, 2 people in her immediate circle had already agreed to talk. She thought she'd won. People who think they've won stop being careful. That was her last mistake. Guthrie's house was a low brick ranch outside Weatherford, 30 minutes west of Fort Worth, with a rusted wind vane on the roof and a wraparound porch where 2 men could sit at night and say very little to each other and still communicate everything important. Callum had been there 3 days. He slept 4 hours the first night. Not from grief, from work. He had spread 2 years of bank statements across Guthrie's kitchen table, color-coded with highlighters he'd bought at a gas station, and by 2 in the morning he had a working map of where his money had gone. The picture was worse than he'd feared. Transfers to a personal account in Nadine's name alone, an account he'd never been told existed, totaling over $60,000. Payments to a company called Veil Group LLC, a Dallas-registered entity that he immediately understood was Preston's. Loan payments on a vehicle he didn't recognize. Charges to hotel brands in Napa, Scottsdale, and Miami. Cities Nadine had told him she'd visited for work conferences. A pattern of ATM withdrawals, always just underreporting thresholds, that had been bleeding his hazard pay for the better part of 18 months. He circled one line item and stared at it a long time. A wire transfer. $92,000. Dated 11 months ago. To an entity listed only as PVH Real Estate Partners. He already knew what PV stood for. He photographed every page with his phone, organized the images by date, sent them to a secure cloud folder. Then he opened his contacts and scrolled to a name he hadn't used in 3 years. Dolores Ancu, forensic accountant, former IRS investigator. She'd helped a sergeant from his old unit navigate a fraud case involving a contractor. She was meticulous, she was discreet, and she was not the kind of woman who was impressed by charm or intimidated by lawyers. She picked up on the second ring. It's Callum Briggs. I just got back from deployment. I need someone to tell me exactly what was done with $200,000. A pause. How soon can you get to Dallas? She said. They met in Dolores's office in uptown Dallas on a Friday morning. Clean lines, low lighting, the kind of quiet professional space where serious conversations happen without theatrics. Callum gave her everything. Bank records, deployment pay stubs, the joint account history, screenshots of transfers, and one document he'd noticed near the bottom of the pile that made the hair stand up on the back of his neck. A refinancing agreement on the Fort Worth house, dated 14 months ago, signed by both him and Nadine. He had not signed that document. He had been in a forward operating base in an active combat zone on the date listed. He watched Dolores's expression as she read it. She was a woman who had spent 20 years reviewing financial crime, and she had a face trained to reveal nothing. But when she set that document down and looked up at him, something in her eyes shifted. Mr. Briggs, she said carefully, this isn't just infidelity and mismanaged funds. I know. This is forgery. This is identity fraud. This is, she stopped. How much equity did you have in that house before you deployed? About 40%. 14 years of payments. She exhaled slowly through her nose. The refinancing agreement she signed in your name pulled out a large portion of that equity. 2 separate draws. The proceeds went to Veil Group and a personal account. She set her glasses down on the desk. There's also a lien filed against the property 6 months ago. A creditor lien. In your name. For what? A business loan. $87,000. Taken out against your military service record and employment history as a co-signatory. You didn't sign this either, did you? It wasn't a question. Callum looked at the document. His name. His social security number. His military ID referenced in the application notes. He had never seen this paper in his life. She used your service record as collateral. Dolores said, your military income, your deployment bonuses, your federal employment history, all of it was leveraged to secure financing for a man named Preston Vale's real estate venture, which, I'll note, appears to have failed approximately 8 months ago. The room was silent. So when I came home, Callum said, I was already in debt. Significantly, between the fraudulent loan in your name, the drained equity, and the depleted accounts. Conservatively, you came home to a net negative position somewhere in a range of $160,000 to $180,000. He sat with that number. He thought about Theo's face in the doorway, the way Avery had cried without explaining why, the dead flower bed, the overflowing mailbox. What do I do? He said. Dolores folded her hands on the desk. First, you file a police report for identity fraud. Tonight, if possible. I will prepare a full forensic summary you can submit alongside it. Second, you contact a family law attorney. I have someone excellent, because whatever divorce proceedings she's planning, You need be ahead of them. Third, you do not speak to her again without counsel present. She paused. And fourth, you let me finish pulling the full thread, because I don't think we found everything yet. Dolores was right. There was more. Over the following 6 days, working through financial records, county clerk filings, and the surprisingly cooperative memory of a woman named Brenda Cho, Nadine's former assistant at the hospitality group, who had left the company 8 months earlier under circumstances that had left her furious, a fuller picture assembled itself. Preston Vale was not simply a man who had fallen into an affair. Preston Vale had been in financial trouble for almost 3 years. His real estate venture, a boutique hospitality development in Frisco, had stalled badly after a contractor dispute. He'd burned through his personal reserves, taken on predatory bridge financing, and by the time he became involved with Nadine, he was quietly, methodically looking for capital anywhere he'd find it. Nadine had been that capital. Brenda Cho, who had processed expense reports and wire transfers on Nadine's instruction, had watched the money flow from the beginning. She hadn't understood the full picture until she'd been quietly pushed out, told her position was being eliminated, handed a minimal severance, and asked to sign an NDA that she had, pointedly, not yet signed. She met Callum at a coffee shop in Plano and talked for 2 hours. She wasn't just in love with him, Brenda said, nursing her latte. I mean, maybe she was, but she was also invested. Literally. She believed his project was going to make them both wealthy. She thought she was trading up. She shook her head. She told me once. I remember this clearly. She said, Preston is going to be worth 10 times what Callum will ever be worth. She said it like she'd already done the math. Callum said nothing. What she didn't know, Brenda continued, is that Preston was telling her what she needed to hear. By the time I left, the Frisco project was basically dead. He'd already moved on to trying to acquire property in Southlake. But the money she was giving him, your money, was just going into a hole. Callum's attorney, a composed Fort Worth family lawyer named Harriet Woolley, had advised him to record no conversations without consent and to let the paper trail speak. But Brenda had sent him something without being asked. A series of text screenshots from her personal phone, messages she had received from Nadine over the past 2 years, some administrative, some personal. One of them, sent 18 months ago, read, He has no idea. He's never going to look. He trusts me too much. That's always been his problem. Callum read it once. He put the phone face down on Guthrie's kitchen table. He went outside and stood in the dark for a while. Then he came back in and went back to work. On day 4, he picked up Avery and Theo from school. Nadine had agreed to a temporary schedule through the attorneys. She was, by now, aware that lawyers were involved and was performing a version of cooperative reasonableness that fooled no one. Callum took the kids to a park near Guthrie's place and bought them hot dogs from a food truck and let them decompress before he asked anything. Theo fell asleep on the drive back. Avery didn't. She sat in the passenger seat, too young to be up front, technically, but she'd asked and he'd said yes because some rules bend for reunions, and watched the road for a while before she said, very quietly, Daddy, we saved something for you. He glanced at her. Yeah. She reached into her backpack. It was a shoebox, sealed with rubber bands, decorated in crayon on the lid. A drawing of a soldier, a house, 2 stick children, and a sun. Daddy's box written, in large, uneven letters. Every letter you sent us, she said. Mom said you stopped writing. But the letters kept coming, and I kept them. I hid them in my closet behind my winter coats. Callum had to stop the truck. He pulled into a parking lot and sat there with the engine running while his 8-year-old daughter looked at him with an expression no child should have to wear. The particular seriousness of a child who's been protecting something important and is finally able to hand it to the right person. He opened the box. 41 letters. Every one of them unopened. He recognized his own handwriting on the envelopes. The return address of the operating base. The postmark spanning 24 months. Nadine had told the children he'd stop writing. She had collected every letter and hidden them rather than throw them away, because throwing them away would have required a certainty she apparently didn't have. And she had told a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old that their father had forgotten them. Callum sat in that parking lot for a long time. He opened the oldest letter and read it aloud to Avery, then the next one, then the next. By the 4th letter, She was crying. By the 6th, so was he. He didn't try to hide it. He'd learned overseas that there was no shame in it, that the men who didn't cry were often the ones who broke. He let her climb across and sit in his lap, even though the steering wheel was in the way, and he held his daughter and read her letters she should have received 2 years ago while his youngest son slept in the back seat. When he was done, he put the letters back in the box carefully. He looked at Avery. "I never stopped," he said. "I know," she said. "I knew." He buckled her back into her seat. He started the truck. And somewhere in the transition between that parking lot and the road, the last thing in Callum Briggs that had been waiting, some quiet hope that this could be resolved quietly, decently, without full consequence, went out. He was done being patient with the situation. He was now being patient for a different reason entirely. Here is something about men like Preston Vale that you learn quickly if you study them. They are architecturally dependent on the confidence of others. Their deals run on belief. The moment the people around them start to doubt, the entire structure shifts. Callum didn't go after Preston directly. Harriet Woolley had been very clear. Let the legal process carry the weight. The forgery complaint had been filed. The identity fraud report was with Fort Worth PD and had been escalated, given the military service record involvement, to a federal contact through Callum's JAG connections. Documents were in the hands of people whose job was to examine them carefully. What Callum did, quietly, methodically, without a single angry phone call, was make sure that certain people in Preston's circle became aware that a federal investigation into financial fraud was underway and that the primary beneficiary of the fraudulent funds was a company called Vale Group LLC. He didn't spread rumors. He didn't make accusations in public. He simply allowed the information to exist in places where it would be found by people who had reason to care about it. Preston's remaining investor, a man named Clifford, who had been considering committing additional capital to the South Lake project, found out on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, Clifford had withdrawn. By Thursday, Preston's commercial lender had called in a review of his loan covenants. By the following Monday, Preston Vale's attorney had called Harriet Woolley's office to inquire about the scope of current proceedings. That was when Callum knew the walls had started to move. Nadine had been operating on a specific theory. The theory was that Callum, having come home to an empty bank account and a wife who'd moved on, would be too humiliated and too emotionally wrecked to fight, that he'd take whatever settlement was offered, sign the papers, and disappear into a VA support group somewhere. She'd seen it before, not personally, but she'd heard enough stories. Men who come back change. Men who can't re-enter civilian life. Men who fold under the weight of betrayal because they've already spent everything they had overseas. She had fundamentally misunderstood who she was married to. Her attorney called her in late April with news that reframed everything. The forgery complaint had generated a criminal investigation. The identity fraud filing had reached federal reviewers due to the military record involvement. A forensic accountant had produced a 47-page report itemizing every transfer, every withdrawal, every wire, every document signed in Callum's name without his knowledge. The report had been submitted to investigators, to the court in the preliminary divorce filing, and, critically, to the Texas State Bar, which had been asked to review the conduct of the attorney who had notarized a fraudulent refinancing agreement. Nadine sat in her attorney's office and heard all of this. And for the first time since Callum had walked out of their kitchen, she understood what she had done. Not morally. That was a separate conversation. Strategically, she understood, for the first time, that she had not simply cheated on a soldier and spent his money. She had committed federal crimes against a decorated veteran with military legal connections, documented everything through bank wires that created a perfect paper trail, used a third party whose own financial desperation made him an unreliable co-conspirator, and then, crucially, told his children he had abandoned them, which ensured that every person who heard this story would feel a specific, focused kind of rage. She had not thought this through. Her attorney told her what came next. Preston Vale, faced with federal scrutiny and the collapse of his financing, had retained his own counsel. That counsel had already made preliminary contact with investigators. Preston's position, delivered through layers of legal language, was simple. He had been manipulated. He had believed the funds Nadine provided were legitimately hers. He had not known about the forgery. He had not participated in the identity fraud. He was, in his attorney's framing, a victim of a woman who had misrepresented her financial situation in the context of a personal relationship. He was throwing her directly under the bus. Not to the side. Not gently. Directly underneath. At speed. Nadine sat in her attorney's office and absorbed this. The man she had chosen over her husband. The man she had funded with her children's home equity. The man for whom she had told her daughter that her father had stopped loving them. That man was now her primary accuser. Her attorney asked her how she wanted to proceed. She had no answer. The hearing was set for a Thursday in June. Fort Worth Family Court, a proceeding that had expanded considerably from a standard divorce filing to include criminal fraud referrals, asset freeze motions, and a custody determination that, given the documented evidence of parental manipulation, specifically, the concealment of a deployed parent's letters from minor children, had already been informally characterized by the family court evaluator as a clear-cut case. Callum arrived early. He sat in the hallway outside the courtroom in a gray suit Guthrie had helped impress the night before, holding a cup of coffee. He wasn't drinking, looking at nothing in particular. Harriet Wole sat beside him and went through her notes quietly. He wasn't nervous. He was the least nervous person in the building, and the building contained a judge, 3 attorneys, a forensic accountant, a court-appointed child advocate, a federal investigator present as a courtesy observer, and Nadine Briggs, who arrived 12 minutes late with dark circles under her eyes and the careful composure of someone who has stopped sleeping. She saw Callum in the hallway. She stopped. He looked at her without expression. She looked like she wanted to say something. Her mouth moved slightly, the way mouths move when words are forming and then being rejected. He turned back to his coffee. She walked past. Inside the courtroom, over the course of 4 hours, the full shape of the last 2 years was laid out in documented, notarized, forensically verified detail. The transfers, the forgery, the loans, the refinancing, the letters, the children's testimony gathered privately by the child advocate, which corroborated everything Avery had told him in the truck. Preston Vale was not present. His attorney submitted a written statement. When Nadine's attorney made his arguments, they were careful and technical and arrived too late, like sandbags after flood. The judge, a measured woman named Honorable Diane Ashworth, who had been on the family bench for 19 years and had heard every version of every story, reviewed the forensic report, the criminal referral documentation, the custody evaluation, and the photograph of a shoebox decorated in crayon that had been submitted as Exhibit Q. She looked at Callum. "Mr. Briggs," she said, "it is a finding of this court that you were subjected to systematic financial fraud during your military deployment, including identity theft, forgery of legal documents, and the misappropriation of military service income. Criminal proceedings will proceed separately. With respect to custody of the minor children, Avery and Theodore Briggs, primary physical custody is awarded to you, with supervised visitation to be determined pending the criminal case outcome." She paused. "I want to know for the record," Judge Ashworth said, and her voice carried something careful and deliberate in it, "that the evidence presented today includes documentation that the respondent withheld the deployed parents' correspondence from the minor children and actively misrepresented that parents' intentions and commitment to those children. This court takes that conduct seriously. It is among the most damaging things a parent can do." Nadine sat at her table and did not move. The gavel came down. Callum took the kids to a Dairy Queen on the way back to what was now, legally and formally, his house again. Theo got a blizzard and ate it so fast he got a headache and had to press his palm to his forehead and groan dramatically while Avery told him he was an idiot, which he said with enormous affection. Callum sat across from them and drank his coffee and watched them bicker. Preston Vale entered a plea agreement 4 months later. Restitution, financial penalties, no prison time. A deal that satisfied nobody entirely, which is often what justice actually looks like up close. Nadine faced separate criminal charges for forgery and identity fraud. The proceedings were ongoing. Her attorney was still arguing. It would take time. Callum wasn't watching the clock on that one. He had his children. He had his house. He had the 41 letters, still in the shoebox with the crayon drawing on the lid, sitting on the bookshelf in the hallway where he could see them every morning when he came downstairs. Brenda Cho sent him a text the evening after the hearing. I heard. Good. You deserve better than all of it. He replied, thank you for talking to me. Guthrie came over that weekend and they sat on the porch and didn't say much, which had always been the most honest kind of conversation between them. What now? Guthrie asked eventually. Callum looked out at the yard. The flower bed was still dead, but he'd bought seeds. He and Avery were going to replant it the following weekend. She'd already picked the colors. Now I raise my kids, he said. Guthrie nodded. That was enough. She had thought the war would hollow him out and hand her everything. But the man who survived 2 years in the desert, who sent every dollar home, who wrote 41 letters to children who never received them, that man did not hollow. He calculated. He documented. He waited. And when the moment came, he didn't need to shout or threaten or perform. He just laid the evidence on the table and let the truth do what the truth does when you finally stop hiding it. Every single thing. Tell us in the comments if Callum earned every second of that. And subscribe, because the next story coming is darker, colder, and the twist at the end will have you rewinding it twice. You've been warned.